I think no matter what, even the people that claim that they, want to go it alone still need someone. No one in this life can go it alone. That's something kind of silly that the Army and other people have kind of pushed down it's the old school, like, hey, as a man, like, don't cry, just suck it up, and, that's fine to a certain extent. There's some things that you can tough through, but deep level trauma is not something you should ever try to do alone.
You're listening to Guards Down. This is Greg Washington.
Hey, good morning. Welcome everyone to Guards Down. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving like I know I had with my family. Today I wanted to introduce a very special guest, David Hoffmaster. David, how's it going?
I'm good, Greg. How you doing over there?
Man, I can't complain. I'm stuffed. I got to wear off some of this turkey I had.
I hear you. It's sometimes a multi-day process there for that kind of thing.
I know, that's right. I see you already got your Christmas tree and stuff set up.
Yeah. I mean, it's 2020. Everyone's not exactly feeling great in 2020. So I felt like I needed to add some Christmas cheer to my house and, bring a little bit of happiness to my own home.
I hear that. Well, good deal. Well, look, of course, we're talking about PTSD and complicated grief. And the goal of the show is to be able to, one, tell a story that will help someone else go through whatever they're going through, right? So having a person to be able to take some tools and put in their toolkit, to help them fight another day. So I appreciate you coming on, and I'm just going to start by, allowing you to tell us more about yourself.
Thanks, Greg. I'm glad to be here on the podcast. I know we've had a chance to talk a few times before this, and I love what you're doing. I think it's a really important thing that's kind of missing right now in the military. I grew up in Chicago, so I was born in Arlington Heights, a suburb of Northwest Chicago. My family kind of just migrated south to Northwest Indiana eventually when I was pretty young. And so I grew up there in what we call the region of Indiana. So it's the Gary, Cherville, Crown Point area of Indiana, and went to high school there, kind of played sports, grew up, had my mom and dad and brother, and then eventually went to West Point, played basketball there for a year, decided to hang up my shoes as I was a 5'11" point guard and realized that was about the end of my basketball career. But then went and served in the Army for 6 years after that, finished as a captain down in Georgia, got out, moved back to actual Chicago, the city, right on the edge of Rogers Park, which is North Chicago there, and started my own business doing a lot of industrial sales. Kind of felt that was something that I'm still more or less doing today, but I needed to still figure out a way to give back, and ended up starting a nonprofit with some friends called Lionheart Junction, with our first division being Hero Hut. So ended up after that moving down to Indianapolis, and that's where I'm at right now.
Oh man, so you've been all around then, huh? Tell us more about your military experience. What branch were you in, and some places you've been stationed at?
Yeah, so I think this is move number 13 for me in the last 10 years. So it's been a journey for sure. I think I need a break, but I branched field artillery coming out of West Point. So started at Fort Sill doing the basic officer leader course. And then we went to Hawaii after that, joined the 235 infantry. So I was a fire sport officer with an infantry battalion. And from there went to Afghanistan over in the Kunar and Pech area. So pretty long deployment, a lot of loss there, and that I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. Mm-hmm. Then I branched detail to Intel. So I went to Arizona next, and that's where I went for the captain's career course. ended up somehow, I played sports my whole life. I was trying to get back into an infantry unit, and I somehow ended up at a cyber unit. The Army gods, as they, often do, choose to send you to places that don't often make a lot of sense. But I helped build one of the first Army cyber teams down at Fort Gordon in Georgia. And that's kind of where the end of the road happened for me, where I was like, all right, it's time to move on.
I hear that. Well, it sounds like you had an interesting career. I know field artillery, playing sports, football. At West Point, they always call field artillery the football alumni. So I got a lot of battle buddies that that branch field artillery. So my hat's definitely off to you.
Hey, that helped me. Because of your battle buddies, I was able to go to Hawaii. I was only like 600 or something in the class. So I was, bottom half. If there was that, what's that football game at West Point? Is it the goats versus the, whatever it's called, the academic ones? You know what I'm talking about? The people that are actually smart versus the people that aren't that smart. So I would have been on the goats team for sure if I was playing there.
Awesome, man. You brought back memories with that one.
Yep.
Well, look, let's jump into it. Right. So, I like to talk about, and one of my favorite questions I like to ask people is, growing up, did your family or the people around you teach you how to deal with trauma and grief?
So, we've talked about this a little bit, but my family, I certainly was blessed to have a really good family. My mom was a fourth grade teacher. I think she started in fifth grade, actually, but she's been teaching for probably about almost 3 decades now. She took a little bit of a break when I was really young, and then I have a younger brother, 2 years younger. But she started, back up on teaching about, I think, once I started elementary school, she went back. And then my father did inner city ministry and inner city work in Gary, Indiana, which is just, it's a rough town. It's a city that's kind of lost a lot of hope. And once the steel industry kind of collapsed in that area in the 50s, the whole town collapsed, and there were some racial issues there with that being said, and there were some other stuff going on there. But he did inner city ministry until this day. So he's 62 or 3. And so I watched them both kind of giving back in their own ways. He also taught martial arts to a lot of kids in that area as well. So I grew up at least having a good foundation of my family. But even with that being said, I don't think trauma is something that ever gets talked about. And one thing that was kind of interesting is, as I got older, I would talk to my dad a lot about some of the stuff that he's seen, because again, he's doing this inner city work. It was called the Old Firehouse Community Center. So he had bought this old firehouse and turned it into a martial arts studio in this really, really rough area in Gary. And the first 2 years, I think it got firebombed twice, just from gangs and different people that just didn't want something new in that area, trying to almost clean up the area a little bit. But after that, it really turned into something special for the community. But once I became an adult, my dad started telling me a lot of stories going on in those areas. And it's once you're older and you get into life and you open your eyes, you see that that's kind of the norm, but it's just trauma everywhere. And it was interesting, though, that he never talked to me about that really as a kid, and neither did my mom. And because we were in kind of a stable home, I had a good education. I went to a public school, but still I had 2 parents that took care of me. I had, my brother who was great, and coaches that were good. So I never really had to deal with trauma as a kid, and it was never really discussed.
Gotcha. Well, man, it sounds like, both your mom and dad were public servants to the community, being teachers and a minister, especially in the inner city.
Yeah. So, Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, what was your ethnic background? Because it was going to lead into the next question about culture and what your culture teaches you about trauma and grief.
Yeah. And I'll say, it was a 180 between how I grew up, where I was really lucky to have, two parents that really took care of me, and I didn't have to go through a lot. I think probably the most traumatic experiences I had were my my mom's dad died when she was pretty young. And so I never met him. And then my other grandfather died when I was young as well. So that's about as bad as it could get, outside of just having a bad sports game or getting in a little scrap or whatever. But outside of that, there's not, I was lucky, and I don't think that's something to be taken for granted. And in terms of ethnic backgrounds, yeah, I mean, I grew up in a mostly middle-class, blue-collar, white type school. And granted, I did have a lot of interaction with a lot of cross-cultural type stuff just because of what my dad did. So I was in Gary all the time. Our school was in the Gary sectional for basketball and football, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was mostly white upbringing.
Mm-hmm. So, with that being said, and your experience going to West Point and being in the military, where it's a big melting pot of different groups and cultures, do you feel like or think there's a cultural difference in how people cope or deal with trauma and grief?
I think there's certainly a cultural difference just in general. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That was, I studied, I think I remember listening to you when you came into our podcast. I did Chinese as well. And I've already given her a few shout outs, but Wang Lao Share was my teacher at West Point. I don't know if you remember who your teacher was. Do you remember?
That was her.
Yeah. So I was not her best student. So I survived is what I could say in Chinese, but I've always had a passion for the world. I've always had a passion for kind of expanding my outlook on culture and pushing myself out of my comfort zone. I've always loved travel. I have enjoyed just reading and trying to just push my understanding of how different people, ethnicities, cultures look at different issues. Trauma is a tough one because, again, I'm not someone that has studied it to death, like a psychologist or a counselor or someone that has spent hundreds of hours of doing it. But it was like a 180. Once I got into the Army in my adult life, it flipped on its head. It went from, my upbringing as a kid and a teenager, where I had a good upbringing. I got lucky with my family. I got lucky in terms of my friends and having good teachers. And then adulthood just kind of, punched me in the face. And, whether it was being in some of the worst kind of war combat that you could see in Afghanistan, to, a divorce, to, financial type stuff, you really, face it in a different way. And when you're asking about cultural differences, I don't know. I've talked to some of my friends that are from different, some of my Black friends and some of my friends from the Hispanic community. And it seems like what I've heard from them is that a lot of times trauma is even more like hidden. Like, it's not talked about. It's something that you almost are supposed to suck it up even more. And I think culturally, that's what I was going to say, because I'm not, I don't have any brothers or, in the Black community. I played basketball, obviously, and football and baseball. So I'm around people in those communities a lot, but when I look at like the Army as well, culturally, it's a spot where you don't talk about trauma, or you suck it up, or you bury it until it's too late, until it's something that is destroying a lot of relationships or other parts of your life that are really important. But I want to ask you though, like, man, how do you feel about that? I know we've talked about it a little bit, but how have you seen that happen and play out?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I personally believe that, cultures do play a difference in how people cope and deal with trauma and grief. For me, when I look at it, I always give the analogy between the wooden spoon and the silver spoon.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who grew up with the wooden spoon in their mouth, I've seen personally have been a lot more equipped with being able to deal with trauma and complicated grief, or PTSD and complicated grief, because at an early age, they had to learn coping skills to get through.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at it from that standpoint. And I just feel like there needs to be a outlet or a community or something before, like you said, before it gets too late, right? Because in the military and, just growing up, you're always taught to just bear down, bear it, and drive on, right? Until it builds up to the point where, you can't take it no more. And a lot of people suffer in silence, and to the point where it just eats away at who they are. And it leads into, this very dark place. And with the work that I'm doing, I kind of build out this model where I talk about people having to go through the valley. Some people have to go through the valley alone. Other people can go support it. All depends on, on the intersect of where you can get help or what you're trying to do. So I look at it differently. A lot of people, they tell me, hey, this is great what you're doing. But it's also scary because it's like, we're talking about the most vulnerable and harshest events of people's life, that sometimes haunt them. And we're talking about death, and we're talking about grief, and we're talking about traumatic experiences. And I personally get, a little nervous because, I don't want it to negatively reciprocate into, someone spiraling out of control and, and committing suicide. But at the same time, I also feel that if we don't talk about it, if we don't give it a chance to break these stigmas, then hell, they might spiral out of control anyway and do it. Right. So why not?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's more important to have at least someone out there that's willing to listen and discuss tough topics. And, there's that complexity and the nuance that you have to have when you talk to different people, because like you said, everyone's different. There's some people that need a little bit more support. Some people want, to sit down and talk with a bunch of people, and some people just need a little bit of time to themselves just to refigure out their own heart and their own life and where they need to go next. But I think no matter what, even the people that claim that they, want to go it alone still need someone. No one in this life can go it alone. That's something kind of silly that the Army and other people have kind of pushed down it's the old school, like, hey, as a man, like, don't cry, just suck it up, and, that's fine to a certain extent. There's some things that you can tough through, but deep level trauma is not something you should ever try to do alone. And I think what you're doing is really important. And you're right. Those are hard conversations to have. I remember, coming back from Afghanistan after we lost a few people, and, I had been dealt with my own grief through that time as well. But I think one of the hardest parts was talking to their families after, when we were doing the memorials back in Hawaii. And it's tough. I mean, it's hard to have conversations about traumatic events or, death or suicide or anything like that, drug abuse, anything that is traumatic in your life. It's difficult to have that conversation and know even how to talk about it. So I think there is certainly a place for, things like Guards Down or other organizations that are at least trying to breach that subject and create a common place to talk about it, because it's definitely needed.
Indeed. And so I'm glad you kind of, started to share your experience And coming back home and having to deal with, the loss of soldiers and talking with their family, I know that's tough. I was a casualty assistant officer for my unit, so I had to escort, good friends back home to their loved ones, and that was hard. I was going to ask you, with some of your experiences, what were some of the coping habits that you had? And I want to talk about the unhealthy ones and how you had to change them to healthy ones.
That's such a good question, because that you have the obvious unhealthy ones, which could be drinking too much, or pushing other people away, or just kind of getting angry or whatever. But I think some of the most unhealthy ones for me were just not really thinking about what I'd gone through at times, or maybe not really digging deep to figure out how much a certain thing affected me. It's easy to to look at a traumatic event, and especially if you are someone that has been able to kind of overcome whatever it is. Let's say for you, I'm sure you've had like plenty of broken bones in your life. I think I'm at like 30 or 40 at this point from all the sports that I played, or overcoming West Point, or all the like other stuff that you've overcome. You think that you're able to just kind of tough it up and go through that, and you don't realize some of the deeper level issues that are going on. And that's the bigger challenge. So, we can get into some of the details about Afghanistan, but I would say it was something that took a long time. I don't think it's something that you can just like fix or even figure out overnight. I think it takes a lot of digging deep, of knowing yourself a little bit, and then also reaching out to the people that are closest to you to talk to them. I myself have gone to counseling just to kind of work on some of the things that I wanted to work on. I went to counseling for my marriage, which unfortunately didn't work out. And that was a, deeply painful, traumatic experience as well. But, I think you need to at least be self-aware enough to know that you need to talk to someone, or at least be a part of a group that can help you, encourage you to kind of grow and figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Just hearing you talk, it reminded me of, this part where we hold ourselves to such high standards, one, and then we're also our worst critics. And when we go to like West Point or go through something prestigious, saying, I'm signing up to defend my country, I'm in the military and I'm representing not only my family, but my country. Mm-hmm. And then we go through these traumatic experiences and they don't play out the way we think they do. We look at ourselves as a failure. And so the shame starts to set in about who you are and your personality. And from there, you get a lot of negative self-talk.
Oh, that's huge. It's huge. I do that. I'm horrible at that. And I've had to, that's probably like one of the biggest things that I've had to work on in my life. And it's almost laughable because I'm someone that someone could probably come up and punch me in the face and I'll be like, all right, man, let's just calm down and maybe we can go have a drink and talk about why you just punched me in the face. And I would laugh it off and walk away. But if I do something, that I feel like it didn't live up to my own standards, I crush myself, it's happened countless times in my life where I'm so hard on myself. And then, so when you get to the point, especially with trauma, and I think you hit it on the head with people that like hold themselves to high standards, you get into that shame cycle, which is so unhealthy. I had someone, she was a really cool, counselor. And I know you asked me a question about this. We can hit that up. But she was former Army as well. But have you ever heard of Brene Brown? Mm-hmm. I'd never heard of her before, but there was a really cool TED Talk about shame versus guilt. And guilt is something that you can feel Like if you did something wrong that you did wrong, like let's say you went to your brother's house and you stole some money from him. You're like, all right, I feel guilty. That's a good feeling because you broke your own standards and your values. But shame is something that's very unhealthy in the way you're unfairly giving yourself this feeling of, let's say, you're a human and you failed at a certain thing or it just didn't work out. And then you put this like weight of feeling of this failure that's unfair for you to put on your shoulders, and it can weigh you down. It can eat you from the inside out, all that kind of stuff. That's just really unhealthy. So that's something that I had to really work on, certainly the last couple of years in my life, where you go to West Point, you think that maybe you might want to make it a career, but you get out, you make a job transition, maybe the marriage doesn't work out. And there's definitely that weight of shame there that I think is normal for a lot of people, but it's something that can easily become something that overwhelms you. And even for me, myself, who I kind of take a little bit of pride in how I can bounce back, shame can easily cloud your judgment and your mind a little bit.
Indeed. And so, with that being said, because you spoke on, some of the unhealthy habits were drinking, pushing people away, getting angry. And I summarize it as this lack of self-reflect, right? To be aware that, or to allow yourself to be aware that you're feeling a certain kind of way and just ignore it and, push through. Right. And so we talked about shame and we talked about, just being able to work through it. So the question that I asked, or when I asked, is how did you work through it? Right. What were some of the things you did to be able to overcome this feeling of shame? And
yeah, and I guess, I'd like to just kind of talk about just some of the situations that I went through, just so I can help explain how I went through the next step. So, I deployed to Afghanistan as a first lieutenant, and I was the fire support officer for Bravo Company 235 Infantry Cacti. And we deployed to Kunar. We knew it was going to be a tough deployment. We replaced the 101st No Slack Battalion. I was advon for our battalion. So the day I arrived at our forward operating base, kind of right on the border of Pakistan, Afghanistan, the mountainous areas over there, they had just gone on a major mission. Strong Eagle 3 or 4. I can't remember what the number was, but they lost 7 soldiers the 2 weeks before we were replacing them. And that was the day I arrived. So I showed up to this unit and attended the memorial on that base for the 7 soldiers. They made a movie about this called The Hornet's Nest. Now at this point, it's a documentary. It's a good, for anyone watching that's not military, it's a good documentary about kind of what it really looks like out there in some of these areas. But that just like hit me right in the face. I mean, it was a punch right in the face. I had never seen combat. I had played sports and done all that. So I at least had some, adversity through sports, through West Point. And I did a lot of, I at least did some martial arts with my dad, but not much. So it was something, seeing death right the first day I showed up to Afghanistan was interesting. And it was a wake up call for me. But then after that, we were taking over that whole area. So in June of 2011, we went on a mission called Operation Hammerdown. And it was a clearance operation in the Waterpur Valley in the Petch River Valley. And it just, it was a nightmare. It was a mission that went south pretty quick. And I ended up losing, one of my best friends in the Army, Dimitri Del Castillo. He was a 09 classmate of mine. And I was his FSO for his platoon. So I was attached to him and then the company commander. and he was killed there on that mission. We lost a few other people on that mission. We had a Chinook that crash landed. It was a shit show, to say the least. And I got hurt on that mission as well. We just got completely ambushed by, I think it was over 100 people. At least that's what the estimate said. It was just our platoon. We kind of got hung out to dry there a little bit. Because of the terrain, the other platoons that were supporting us and companies that were supporting us were a little bit too spread out. So when we first got ambushed, it took a long time for them to reinforce us. So the first day, it was a firefight from early afternoon till, almost late at night. And there were medevac after medevac that were trying to land to take people out. And I was constantly on the radio as the fire support officer to, talking with the Apaches and Kiowas and the Air Force that were trying to support us. But my friend died almost immediately to start that mission in the initial ambush. And then we continued to fight throughout that. And that shook me 100%, in terms of hearing that he had been killed. I was probably only about 100, 200 yards away, but I didn't see him. And then I, trying to avoid myself getting shot, we were all pinned down from this machine gun fire. I made the foolish decision to kind of slide off this little hill, and it turned out to be a little bit bigger, and it just completely destroyed my spine. As a football player, it was like a little bit worse than like one of those stingers, and completely lost feeling in my legs and everything. And that was early afternoon. So we continued to fight throughout that day, and I got medevaced out the following morning to all the way to Germany to get my spine checked out and to rehab there for a month. And then I made the decision to come back to Afghanistan and try to rehab the rest of the way in Afghanistan and be a part of that same unit. But at that point, I had lost one of my good friends, and the whole dynamic in our unit had shifted after that mission in terms of the trauma that people had felt. I took over a artillery platoon later, and on that same base, one of my soldiers in my platoon got shot while he was in the DFAC line. So most of our buildings on that base, it was a small base, were hard shelter, but for whatever reason, the food area was not. It was a tent. And we would get shot at almost every day. It would be like once a day, someone would take a machine gun and basically spray at the base or shoot a couple mortars or a rocket at the base. It was usually inaccurate. We didn't really have too many people get hit, but he got hit in the calf. And over the course of the next few years, he came back, super tough kid. And I mean, everyone loved him. Everyone was, he was a great sergeant. He was a great team lead, everything, all of that. But he ended up kind of getting addicted to some of the painkillers that they prescribed him. He came back as well, straight to the base, and had a cane and everything. And he was that stubborn that he got shot in the calf, came right back, just took his painkillers and continued the mission. And then unfortunately, when I got out in Chicago, the Army chaptered him due to that kind of addiction to the painkillers. And he was one of the, those that took his life. And that was almost even more traumatic for me than what I went through in combat. And I, Hammer Down was one of them, but I'd seen other people get shot. I'd, been in where I've shot at people and shot people, and the suicide just rocked me. It was so unexpected. And I did. I mean, I cried that day. I did not expect it. And it was tough. And so I know I have not answered your question at all on that, but that's just at least a little bit of my background of what was leading up to that. And then dealing with those feelings, I guess, over time was just very interesting because, again, I thought I could do it mostly on my own, or I thought I was tough enough to figure it out. And for the most part, I'm not saying I was tough enough, but I had faith. I had my faith in God and my faith that allowed me to at least have a foundation set to where I didn't completely crumble. But I did need to reach out to people, over time. Without my family or friends, or even doing some like just talking to people about those experiences, I think it would have really eaten me out from the inside out. And I had a good opportunity to just, even over the course of drinks or whatever, talk about some of this stuff with other veterans. And I think that's really healthy, just to at least get your story out there, at least talk to someone that can maybe understand what you went through. And that was super healthy as well for me.
Man, I wasn't expecting all of this. So I appreciate you sharing. And I'm just sitting here, just in shock because, hell, I wasn't expecting, all of this. What I will say to both of your friends, well, to your friend and to, the other soldier that committed suicide, is that, a person dies twice. And I know you probably heard this. A person dies twice, once in the physical and the last time their name is spoken. So being able to help share their story and their grit and character, I think that is so honorable in the process of healing and overcoming. And so to be able to, one, have the self-awareness to say, okay, I acknowledge that there's a higher power than me. B, I can't do this alone. And 3, I need people that understand me as well, that I can talk to and just share it and get this out. I mean, like, that's big. Yeah. Because we're fighting so many different battles in itself, not just physical, but that mental and internal battle. And so to be able to just have that self-awareness and self-reflection to know where you're at, and then to raise your hand and say, yeah, all right, I need help. I got myself this far. I need help getting further. And so to be able to come from that to where you are now, where you have Hero Hut and you are helping other people, that's amazing. Right? Because
I appreciate that.
you turn your situation from being a victim to a survivor to a hero because you're helping other people. Right. And so, I mean, that is just, my hat's off to you, man. It's a pleasure to sit here and talk with you. I just say that, man. I really appreciate it.
Same thing with you, Greg, you came on our podcast and you shared your story there, and a lot of similar situations in terms of what we've seen and the similar trauma. And so I think what you're doing there with We Are Iron and Guards Down is awesome. And I hope that we can kind of encourage more people to at least just open up and be a part of the greater community of veterans that is out there. When I look at my trauma again, there were some tough days, and there were some days where it, you had the anger, the sadness, the questioning of what it was all for, all that kind of stuff. But in the same sense, I knew deep down that, at least for me, I do believe in God and that there is a higher power, but that doesn't need to mean that he's going to all of a sudden give you all the answers to why there's trauma or why you went through that. But, I had that faith, and I also have my friends. And sometimes I think God puts those people in your life for a reason. And that's, life is still, for me, I still enjoy it. I still, take every day for what it is and try to enjoy it and live it as best I can. Not to say that there's not bad days, but, it's been a interesting journey, but it's been a good one overall.
Indeed. That's amazing. So when we look at this, because there's 2 more topics that I want to hit before we wrap up. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about support, right? Through all of this, what kind of support did you need for yourself right? Internally, and then externally, what kind of support were you looking for from the people around you?
I think again, psychology, trauma is so complex that it's hard to really put into words what, that there's a reason that even psychologists and counselors are looking for all kinds of different options of how to talk to people, because the brain is a wild one, and it's not something where you can say 2 + 2 = 4. So you can't say, all right, how do you deal with trauma? It's different for every single person. What I needed at the time was just people to kind of support me, love me, do whatever word you want to use, but just be there for me. And I listened again to your podcast when you jumped on our podcast, and there was a really good story that you had with your cousin there, where it was just a simple, hey, do you want to come hang out? That's sometimes for me been the biggest almost encouragement. Is I can remember even with my soldier that had killed himself, I was shook up for sure. I finished my day at work, came home, and was told that he had done that. And I was, completely unexpected, and, it shook me up. I reached out to a few friends, and some of them were kind of busy or whatever. But one of my good friends, Phil Kojic, who lives out in LA, reached out and was like, all right, yeah, man, like I'll meet you wherever. And so I was living in Chicago at the time. He came out, and we just went out for the night, and kind of hung out, and he just listened, and we just talked for hours. And it wasn't even always about what had happened, but that, Phil was there for me at that time, and he didn't need to give me any wise words. He was just there. And I think that's where we as people, when we're dealing with trauma or trying to support other people, kind of we're missing the point. You don't need to give someone wise advice. Sometimes it's just being there for that person, just giving them love, showing them that you're there, that you're there to listen. And I think that's much bigger than trying to fix their problem for them, because it's going to take time. Any kind of trauma is going to take a long time to heal from. And a lot of that has to be internal. Like any real true healing is going to be you having the self-awareness to work through your own issues. But what you can do for someone else, or what you can ask for if you're going through trauma, is just for people to listen and be there for you. And at least just give you the support to know that they're going to have your back no matter what you're going through.
Indeed. Okay.
How about you? When you were going through stuff, what worked for you?
Man, so it was tough for me because I'd always been the head of my family, right? So everybody comes to me when there's problems. And so, when I'm having a problem, it's like, all right, well, who do you turn to? Right. Mm-hmm. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to lean on the guys that I played football with. They was there. One of my really good friends and frat brother, Reggie Nevels, he's always been someone that I could just talk to and just, open up and share. And like you said, those kind of moments help get me through, because it wasn't that I needed wide advice, just someone there to talk with. And so being a part of the Army Football Brotherhood was a big thing, because when I say the brotherhood is strong, like it is strong. And so, I want to take a moment to just acknowledge one of our fallen brothers, Lyle Weaver, who graduated from West Point, before we did. I had a chance to play football with his brother. And here he is, a couple of years older than us, not too much. And he just passed away a few weeks ago from stage 4 cancer. And when, the doctor said, hey, look, there's nothing more we can do. We're going to send you home. The brotherhood showed up. You had guys flying in from all parts of the U.S. and, the country to come see him. and just be with him and show him that love and support. And then for his younger brother, man, you know, all the guys he played football with, we were there to check on him and be there. And so, man, like that love that they shown, I mean, is priceless, because shoot, who would have thought, you know, just picking up this pigskin and playing football and tossing around would lead to people forming a bond that is stronger than just blood. Right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I hear you on that. Yeah, 100%.
So, you know, that was mine for me. And really just having to humble myself and acknowledge that there were someone higher than me and that there was a greater plan than what I had or thought for my life.
Oh, that's a good one too, right? Humbling yourself. I mean, yeah, God has a funny way of teaching a lot of us that we're not that amazing.
Indeed. So tell me this, right? And this part of being humble, and this is, you know, the last piece. How hard was it making amends to the people you hurt? Because that old saying, hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So tell us about making amends.
You know, I didn't lash out too often. I think what I did, I internalized things a lot. You know, I obviously with a failed relationship or whatever, that's, you know, a different subject, but in terms of workplace, friends, family, I didn't lash out to any of them. I stayed kind of grounded and I internalized a lot of things. But what I can say is that probably like the last duty assignment I had, especially in the Army, I was a little bit frustrated. I was a little bit angry, a little bit cynical at times, and I didn't take advantage of what I could have there. But I guess I'm not someone that ever is afraid to say that I messed up or I failed, but it is a challenge to kind of humble yourself and to at least acknowledge that you need help or that you are someone that, I don't know the right word to say that, you know, you messed up there or you did not do what you were supposed to, whether that was, you know, taking advantage of a opportunity that you lost because you were, you know, going through grief or trauma. And that's okay. It's okay to go through trauma, but in the same sense, if you're kind of lashing out at people or losing your temper a little bit, again, for me, that was mostly internal. I think you talked about doing some damage to the home. I've also made that mistake as well. One of my walls also had some repair that needed to be done after a day of anger there. So I think what for me is I just wasn't myself at times with people. I wasn't who I should be. I wasn't the full David. And again, it's okay to work through trauma and grief, but you know, your relationships and family and others deserve for you to at least acknowledge it and try to work on it and at least reach out.
Indeed.
What about you? I mean, how did you have to deal with that? I don't know, you know, we've talked a few times, but I don't know your full story of how you had to, you know, work through that yourself.
Yeah, no, for me, you know, like I said, with the wall, you learn how to become a handyman real quick.
Sure. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm
glad I didn't hit a stud. That's for sure. I'm glad I didn't, you know, I'm glad it was just the drywall, right?
Exactly. So I'm glad, you know, looking back, I'm able to make light of the situation, you know, mm-hmm. But it took a long time. One, acknowledging the humble part, right, was the first aspect of it. Just acknowledging that and just accepting that, okay, I am here in this time, in this moment, in space, and it's not going the way I want it. It doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. And so having that and keeping the faith and hope that tomorrow is going to be a better day, but knowing that I have to work at it on a consistent basis. So 2 things that I do, I chase my pursuit of happiness and my pursuit of laughter. Right. So, I try to keep myself in good spirits as much as possible. And when I do have them days where I have triggers, I just revert back to day one. All right, get myself up off the ground, do X, Y, and Z. For me, it's making my bed up, because that's the first successful things that, that quick win that I get started for the day, and then just build from there.
Yeah. That's huge. Yeah. I think you hit it on the head there. One thing I've talked to a lot of other people that have gone through trauma or grief is there's almost this concept that if life kind of throws you lemons, that like it owes you something, that somehow life is going to give you, a lottery ticket after you go through trauma to fix it all. But that's not true. You have to pull yourself back up and rely on what life has already given you. And that's yourself, and that's your friends. And if you're lucky to have a good family, you have to take each day then and start building back up, because you're not going to be able to move and process through trauma without actually taking those steps each day to kind of right your mind and help start healing a little bit. And it's not easy, and it's not supposed to be, but it is on you to at least take that step to decide that that's what I want to do.
Indeed. All right. Well, look, we're getting ready to wrap up. My last question, right, is what advice would you give your younger self?
I think just be more humble and listen more. I think, at times I've been someone that has been able to learn quickly and accomplish stuff. And in some ways that allows your pride as a young person to get to a level that it should never be. And I wouldn't say I was boastful or just being a complete asshole or anything, but in the same sense, if you have unhealthy pride in stuff that you shouldn't take pride in, it allows you to not seek help or to listen to others when you should, or to kind of actually understand, we talked about culture earlier, to have that cross-cultural understanding and desire to actually listen to someone that has a different way of thinking than you. I think pride is one of those things. I would encourage, if I were to look at myself, I would say, listen to others and continue. It doesn't mean you need to change your values, but at least have the integrity and humility to know that you don't have the answers to complex questions of trauma, grief, all that kind of stuff. It is kind of funny until you go through life, you think it's, some of these situations of life are kind of easy at times, but it is not.
Indeed. Man. Well, do you see your growth then from now?
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely a work in progress. With Hero Hut 2, it's given me a good outlet to use a lot of the lessons that I've had in life, to encourage others, to build community, to be there for each other. We have the nonprofit there, and with what we're doing there, we're also able to kind of encourage other organizations, even like your own, to be a part of this greater collective community. Some of the things that we've already talked about before this, where, you can help others grow, including yourself, by being a part of this effort to better others and to better yourself. And it's a fun journey to be a part of.
Indeed. Well, David, I appreciate you coming on and sharing and dropping some jewels, man. I got about a page and a half worth of notes on my end, so I definitely got something out of it. And for all those listening, I hope you did as well. And so, David, I'm going to let you close, and please tell us a little bit more about Hero Hut and how we can join and become a part of, that mission and help you succeed in helping others.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me on. For Hero Hut, what we're to empower veterans to find a civilian life defined by service and surrounded by community. So we're taking Hero Hut across the nation right now. We're in about 15 states already, but what we try to do is set up a hospitality tent for veterans at major events, festivals, sporting events. And then we partner with lots of other veteran organizations. So the VA, Team RWB, Honor Flight, all these, SBA, it could be, there's hundreds of them that we bring to these events and let them set up a table at our spot. We help, highlight what they're doing. And then we just make it a community area for veterans to kind of come talk about their stories, get some resource help. And that happened about 2 years ago. And we've kind of expanded it from this point. And we've really honed down on the mission of what we were trying to do, of encouraging community, but doing that through service and then also providing resources to veterans. So we're a completely volunteer organization right now. And what we do is we try to promote as many other veteran and first responder type nonprofits out there. We set up shop at different cities and then help almost be the middle ground for a lot of these organizations, because there's so many awesome veteran organizations helping people. We're not looking to necessarily be the one to come up with a new niche idea or a niche, whether that's homeless veterans or job training for veterans, or, we're not going to start a podcast like you're doing right now with trauma. What we're trying to do is get all those missions to the veterans. So we're helping spread the word. We're helping kind of be a launching point for a lot of these other organizations, but also we're helping to build a community. So we have Hero Hut Pint Nights. We're building a Hero Hut Volunteer Day per month in some of these cities where veterans can kind of come together, be a part of a team and do something in their own community, whether that's like a park cleanup or whatever. Maybe we'll get into some kind of like Thanksgiving, next year here in Indianapolis, I would love to have a Hero Hut Day where we do Thanksgiving handout. My father used to do a Thanksgiving feast for about 600 in Gary. Growing up, I would love to do that just even for an hour or two where veterans could kind of come in and serve again. And it's given that purpose of being a part of a team again to veterans, because a lot of times they move around, they get isolated in their communities. And 2020 has been a nightmare for that. And so we want to allow them to feel like they're part of a community, but also Hero Hut is trying to get the resources out to veterans. And again, it's not through necessarily anything that we're doing. We're trying to promote a lot of these other organizations that are doing awesome stuff as well.
Right. So how can an organization sign up, and how can a person become a part to be a member or get the resources?
Yeah. So right now, the biggest thing that we need is people to just get on our Facebook page, sign up for our newsletter on our website. We're on Instagram. And then we also have a podcast telling veteran stories. So, follow our Facebook page. We are creating Facebook groups in cities across the country right now. So right now, I think we have about 10 different Facebook groups. I think it's Chicago, Columbus, Ohio. We have Savannah, Georgia. We have a Bay Area out in California, Milwaukee, Indianapolis. So if you are interested in even building your own Hero Hut chapter and want to help be a part of that team, reach out to us. If you are someone that wants to just follow along, sign up for the Facebook. And then we're going to have a lot of different stuff coming up next year in terms of the partnerships. Hopefully, we'll knock on wood that, COVID has kind of calmed down by next year and we'll be at events again. But that's, game time decision, I guess, on that. But what we need most is, get on our Facebook page, like the page, share it with your friends, invite other veterans that might be interested in being a part of the Hero Hut community. If you have people that you would like for us to have on our podcast, or other veteran nonprofits that you all think would be, interested in being a part of a Hero Hut event to where we can promote them, that's some of the stuff that would be very, very easy that anyone could do.
All right. Well, David, once again, man, thank you for coming on and sharing. I really appreciate you. And for all you Guards Down listeners, I hope y'all are staying safe, staying focused and staying engaged. We're out.
You've been listening to Guards Down with Greg Washington. PTSD and complicated grief are very real. About 8 out of every 100 people will have PTSD at some point in their lives. About 20 to 54% of people with complicated grief will simultaneously suffer from major depressive disorder. And that's why shows like this are hugely important, raising awareness for PTSD and complicated grief. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hook up with us at guardsdown.com, weareiron.org, on Facebook at Guards Down, and find us on YouTube and Instagram.